Thanks to the liberation operation led by the Ukrainian armed forces, the Ukrainian heroes started to gradually push the Russian forces towards the country's border as the suffocating attacks of the Ukrainian heroes further devastated Russian army. In particular, at this point, the heroic soldiers of Sedansky practically demand that Russian troops leave the Ukrainian lands they occupied. Since February 24, more than 60,000 soldiers. The Russian Federation also lost nearly 15 military vehicles, including more than 2,000 tanks, despite the Kremlin administration and Vladimir Putin's efforts to conceal them. It was thought that the mobilization decision announced by the Russian leader, along with the requirement that the Russian Federation purchase ammunition and art drones from Iran, would contribute to the losses. Russia recently applied to China for the supply of military ammunition, but China unequivocally rejected Russia's demands and denounces Russia's actions in annexing Ukraine. Although the main reason for this is the supply of spare parts due to economic sanctions, Putin had to leave Xi's door empty-handed, but the Chinese government has never referred to Russia's operation in Ukraine as a war and has supported the Russian Federation diplomatically. By the way, we should mention that Iran and North Korea are on the US's blacklist, along with many other countries. Vladimir Putin's attempt to demobilize those countries also failed, and the majority of Russian citizens began to leave the country by packing their bags properly. Dire decision to mobilize Vladimir Putin, who tried his luck in the Russian Federation's minority republics, was met with fierce opposition to mobilization in Dagestan, and the Russian leader continued to look for new talent. State neither intended to fight for Russia nor give it military aid. The Russian leader, who is over the current state of international affairs and diplomacy, stated that the best course of action this time was to put sanctions on Europe using his most valuable asset as leverage. Vladimir Putin promised to supply Russian natural gas to all of Europe and even imposed many energy sanctions against France and Germany, but neither of these plans were successful since the Russian leader lacked the necessary financial resources. For the Ukraine war, and Russian natural gas could not be a blackmail tool that he could use on the battlefield, so the Russian leader made improvements in the energy sanctions he imposed on Germany. Now with no virtual run, the Russian administration had to several some shocking facts. Yes, the sentences that made everyone move were said by Russian administration. The Russian army has run out of ammo since February 24. The Russians who roughly used weapons and other things in the Ukraine war, and Russian natural gas could not be the tanks that the Russians employed in the conflict, are also from the Soviet era, and Russian troops are now using several weapons from that era. The vast majority of Russian soldiers no longer want to fight in Ukraine as a result of this situation, and many soldiers and senior officers in the Russian army have lost hope for the Ukrainian war. Particularly in the first 3 months of the war, a noticeable increase was seen in the number of soldiers fleeing the Russian troops and seeking refuge in the Ukrainian armed forces. Armament shortages significantly impacted both sides of the conflict, but Russian soldiers who wish to save their lives must either entirely withdraw from the front lines of the conflict or surrender to the Ukrainian armed forces and live under the protection of the General Convention rules. Russia was substantially worse off as a result of this. Ukraine, on the other hand, was able to survive for a long time thanks to the assistance of Western nations, particularly the USA. In particular, the HIMARS missile system provided by the US government to the Ukrainian armed forces caused directions to collapse in terms of both the army and morale. HIMARS, which turned into a weapon of hell in the hands of a valiant Ukrainian army, had a significant impact on altering the course of the war. HIMARS also destroyed Russian air bases, tanks, and aircraft, so why doesn't the US government, which is in possession of such a potent weapon, do more to help Ukraine? Threats posed by Russia include the use of nuclear weapons. As a result, the US administration does not in any way place Ukraine and any other country that would be harmed at risk. However, when we consider it and regulate it, no matter how much the US government supports Ukraine and declares that it will continue to do so, the US government must act decisively. On the other hand, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is compelled to contact China in order to endure the aid and financial packages going to the Ukrainian army. Also lives here and knocked on China's door, but came up empty-handed. Since the beginning of the war, the Chinese administration has talked about supporting Russia and that the aid to Russia could be unlimited, but the balances have changed, and it appears that the Chinese government has saved the aid it mentions for another spring when Russia has no other hope than political and diplomatic support. China's attitude towards the Russian administration was enough to surprise the entire world. North Korean artillery shares occasionally have to be turned. Iran. The Department of Strategic Communications of the Ukrainian Armed Forces has released images of a destroyed drone that resembles the wing of Iran's shaded 136 strong. Yesterday, Ukraine's Minister of Defense said it is possible for Russian forces to use Iranian matrons, and Ukraine's Minister of Defense say that Russia is almost certainly procuring more drones. The Ukrainian Minister of Defense claimed to have shot down an Iranian drone used by Russian forces near Kupiansk. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, eventually reached this point as a result of the irregular soldiers in the Russian army. The Russian commander was forced to leave numerous crucial areas. The Russians who were forced to flee significant towns like Kherson, Nimnia, and Donetsk are reportedly experiencing extremely trying times right now, and it is believed that things will only get worse for them as Ukrainian heroes continue to capture significant towns like Donetsk, Kherson, and Kharkiv. Right now, it appeared that Ukraine's strategy to remove Russia from the conflict was working quite well. Vladimir Putin's army currently has two choices, similar to the two main options that Ukrainian troops must choose from. Either the Russian armed forces will be compelled to enter negotiations since their wartime weapons will be worn out. Both options are currently working for the Ukrainian government and its precious army, because against Russia, which is training old weapons, there is now a very powerful and modern Ukraine. We will discover together what can happen in the future, so keep cool for the moment and don't forget to open the bell and fire if you see anyone.